Hi, and welcome to another episode of the InCamera podcast with me, Alvin Tedjo, where we bring you behind the scenes of politics here in the city of Mississauga and the province of Ontario. On today's pod, we have Green Party leader Mike Schreiner. Mike was first elected leader of the Green Party in 2009 and has been an elected member of the legislature since 2018. He's serving his third term right now in the legislature, and we talk about the Green Party's role in a provincial government where there's a majority. We also talk about Mike's background as a small business owner and a guy who was known as a food policy expert. Mike currently lives with his wife and his two young daughters, which he talks a lot about in terms of his reasons for running for politics. And now, my conversation with Green Party leader Mike Schreiner. Let's just jump in a little bit around what are you doing right now that's non-political? What's something non-political related that you're doing that people might not know about?
Well, one of the things I love doing in the summer is I'm an avid cyclist. And one of the great things about living in Guelph, I can be out in nature in 5 minutes, even though I live, literally across the river from the city center. Mm-hmm. And so I'm doing a lot of cycling right now. I love to do hiking and canoeing, which a lot of people probably know that about me because I do a canoe trip with my daughter every summer. And,
where do you go?
So we go everywhere.
Yeah.
My favorite trips are in Temagami. Temagami is my favorite place to paddle. But this year, we're doing Kawartha Highlands Provincial Park, provided it's not on fire. I think the fire's under control now.
Not surprising. Green Party leader likes to spend some time outside in nature. What are you reading right now? What are you listening to?
What am I reading right now? My staff gives me a rough time because I like to read dystopian climate novels.
Okay.
It seems like a hazard of my job, but
it keeps you motivated, right?
Keeps me motivated.
Yeah.
I just checked out of the Guelph Library today, Marilyn Robinson's Gilead, which is a book I've wanted to read for a long time. I can't tell you how many podcasts I listen to that people say that's their favorite novel. So I'm going to start reading it tonight.
I've been trying to dive into Abundance, which talks a lot about how municipalities function or don't in North America and how they could function better. But
so what am I listening to?
Yeah.
Ezra Klein. I listen to Ezra Klein all the time. So one of the co-authors.
Okay, let's get into a little bit of your background. How did you get into to politics, into where you are, and then choosing the journey to run for the Greens? Because you can assume that a lot of politicians are pretty ambitious and they want to get into politics. They want to get elected. Running for the Green Party doesn't necessarily give you that path. So why don't you take us through that journey?
Well, first of all, I'll just say the reason the Greens is I have this saying on my desk, I choose the right path, not the easy path. And I've made that choice almost my entire life. Mm-hmm. I started one of Ontario's first local organic food distribution businesses at a time when most people didn't know what the word organic meant, and nobody cared about local food. And so here we are, 25, 30 years later, and, we have a strong local food movement. Trump's making it even stronger, and people know what organic food is. I started a food production business as well. Started a nonprofit called Local Food Plus, all designed about how to get local food into restaurants, universities, long-term care homes, things like that. And those were all people said, you're way ahead of your time. And so I think leading the Green Party is very similar to that.
Okay.
And I started volunteering with the Greens in 2007. I co-authored the platform in that election for the Greens. And I chose the Greens because at that time they were the only party that I thought was really talking about the climate crisis. Mm-hmm. The Liberals were starting to. I got to give them the anti-government credit. They were starting to do some things like the Greenbelt Act, but not in sort of the systemic kind of change way that I felt we needed. And I'm big on social justice and especially income inequality. And the Greens were the first party to say, hey, let's implement a basic income in Canada. And I'm a deep believer in grassroots democracy. And the Greens have always been about grassroots democracy, proportional representation, and so those are the three issues that motivated me to go into politics. Felt the Greens were the best on those issues, even though I knew it was not going to be easy being elected as a Green. But, the entrepreneur in me just felt that, hey, you know what? I've started businesses, I've started nonprofits. Even though the Greens have been around for a while, it felt like an entrepreneurial adventure, and I was like, I'm going to go for the ride and see if we can make this happen. And now we have 2 seats.
What was the decision that got you to jump to put your name on the ballot?
Yeah, so I've always been interested in politics. When I meet with young civics classes, I always say I was one of those strange kids that was interested in politics when I was like 10 years old. And I grew up on a farm in rural western Kansas. My dad would put me on a tractor at 7 in the morning, pick me up at 7 at night. We had no radio, nothing, pretty boring, driving around a circle all day in a tractor. And so I would pretend like I was giving political speeches, believe it or not.
Okay.
So some people say, like, geez, my God, how did you become so good at giving speeches? I'm like, I had lots of practice.
Yeah.
So when I was I was like involved in student government when I was in high school and university. I soured on party politics after working in Washington, D.C. for a while. And I
could imagine that was challenging.
And this was back in the early 90s, so I couldn't even imagine being there today. But I just saw the role that big money played in politics, and it soured me on it. So that's when I said, you know what, I can do politics by starting a food business and changing the food system. But after doing some of that kind of work for a while, I really recognized that if I wanted to really, truly make the systemic changes that I felt we needed for a better life, electoral politics was the way to go. And my family was like, you got to stop complaining about it and start getting in and doing it. And so that's when I started volunteering for the Greens.
Yeah, it's easy to complain. It's much harder to put your name on the ballot and try to do something about it.
Exactly.
And you kept going because there was a few elections between 09 and 18.
Yeah.
And obviously those weren't as successful for you. But kudos to you now. You've got 2 seats and you were competitive in a number of other seats in the last election. And, just talking about some of those policies, I think we've connected on some of those policies. When I ran myself, talked about a basic income pretty thoroughly. We talked about the school system as well. So certainly a lot of alignment, I think, with a lot of Ontarians with Green Party policies when they actually take the time to read them.
Yeah, actually, when you ran for leader of the Liberal Party, I was thinking, I don't know, is Alvin running for the Liberal leader or Green leader? I'm not sure here, because there were a lot of policy overlaps for sure.
And that's good policy, right? We're hoping that good policy gets to more people, but you also want, you need those parties who are willing to take those steps or take those positions to try and make them mainstream, right? And whether it's the Greens or candidates who unsuccessfully run for the leadership, it's good that we can keep talking about those.
Well, I think it makes democracy stronger. And, I always joke with folks, if you want to see what kind of policies Ontario's mainstream parties are going to be passing in 10 years, look at the Green Platform. And, that's the case up until Doug Ford came along and then took Ontario in a very different direction.
So let's get in that a little bit, because I know recently, your party, even the Canadian government, even us here, when we're part of municipal alliances, we talk about climate change, sustainability, resiliency, especially with a lot of our infrastructure. We've had to position ourselves a little differently now to give it more of an economic lens, an economic focus, to sort of say, listen, these 100-year storms that are happening every summer, twice last summer in Mississauga, that's bad for business, that's bad for the people who live here, and it's expensive, right? And we're no longer talking about mitigation. We're now talking about adaptation, right? And so if you put on your environmental hat, which I'm assuming you're wearing all the time, how do you try to tie these pieces in to where everybody's kind of focused on in terms of the economy?
Well, first of all, you focus in on the economy and you meet people where they're at. But I can tell you, 10 years ago or even 5 years ago, if you had told me that renewable energy, wind, solar, battery storage would be the cheapest forms of energy, and if you told me that heating and cooling your home with an electric heat pump would be far cheaper than any gas furnace or fossil fuel based heating system, if you had told me that in this year alone, $2.2 trillion is being invested in the clean energy transition, double the investments that's going into fossil fuels. If you told me that the floods that hit the GTA last summer cost us $1.3 billion an hour, the fires from 2 years ago cost our health care system $1.4 billion, that we'd see LA burn, that we'd see the kind of climate disasters that we're seeing, combined with the economic and the cost savings, it would be a no-brainer that the climate movement would be as strong as it's ever been, and that's not the case right now. And I think a lot of that's driven by economic anxiety. But here's the reality is, Ontario is perfectly positioned, if we have the political will and the policy framework to do it, to become an energy superpower in the clean economy. We have steel that we can be using to make wind turbines tomorrow. Not like what the Premier's talking about, maybe 10 years if we, have a feasibility study for a pipeline or, this ridiculous tunnel idea that he has. Almost every economic idea the premier's put forward will happen 10, 15 years in the future.
Mm-hmm.
Right now, globally, $2.2 trillion in 2025 is being invested primarily in wind, solar, and battery storage. You need steel for that. You need aluminum for that. You need copper for that. You need
all
everything Ontario's got that Trump is tariffing, that we want to use right now, manufacturing. And so let's not wait 10 years. Let's literally do it right now. Let's start attracting our fair share of that 2.2 trillion and start creating good paying union jobs in Ontario, building out low cost energy systems that will help us become a global leader. It'll be good for our economy. It'll lower energy prices, and it'll address the climate crisis at the same time.
It seems like there's that mindset still with certain people that needs to adjust, where they see, fighting climate change as, when the time is right or when it's convenient. They don't yet see it as an opportunity or the opportunity that it is. And even when you're looking at this economic crisis, right, they don't sort of see how much more expensive it's going to be if we're not addressing it, or the opportunity that we could potentially have if we can be leaders in it and taking advantage of it. How do we get them there?
Well, I tell you what, one of the things is having conversations like this. I mean, I just find it infuriating that more heat pumps are being installed in the U.S. than any other form of heating because it's the cheapest for people. Europe is experiencing 40% annual growth in heat pump installations. So when the Independent Ontario Energy Board a year ago made a decision that said, you know what, we should stop subsidizing fossil gas hookups and to create a level playing field for heat pumps in Ontario, within 12 hours, the Ford government, after a flurry of emails with oil and gas giant Enbridge, decided to announce that they were going to introduce legislation at the first chance they had to overturn an independent OEB decision, an unprecedented intrusion into the independent energy regulator in this province to protect an oil and gas giant. And the people of Ontario are going to pay the price for that. And so part of my job is to get out there and talk to people about how the decisions the Ford government is making to protect the fossil fuel industry is making our lives more expensive and is going to be hurting our economy because we're not making the investments we need to make to attract our share of the $2.2 trillion being invested in the green energy transition this year alone.
Yeah, absolutely. And I mean, they want to point to some of the shiny announcements that they've made in terms of EVs, but that doesn't solve the problem. An EV is still a car on the road, and it still adds to traffic. And now I have 2 EVs myself, and I've got solar panels because the reality of living in Mississauga or Guelph is you're going to need one to get around, but that doesn't mean that we can't have those options and give people that choice.
100%. And the other thing the Ford government is forgetting is they've looked at a lot on the supply side. We do want to manufacture electric vehicles. We want Ontario to be a global leader in manufacturing electric vehicles. They've completely dropped the ball on the demand side. Most electric vehicles are being shipped to Quebec and British Columbia and other provinces that have policies in place that support making EVs more affordable for people and have sufficient charging infrastructure for people to be able to drive EVs. I can tell you, I've been driving an EV all electric for over 5-6 years now, and this is the first summer I've ever had challenges charging.
Yeah.
Not because there aren't chargers out there, but because so many people are starting to drive electric now that every time I go to charge, there's 5 other people there charging. So we're so far behind in Ontario having the infrastructure to be a leader in the electric vehicle sector. And so, how are we going to manufacture these things and create jobs and make money if we don't create the conditions for people to be able to affordably drive electric vehicles in Ontario?
Mike, that exact scenario happened to me just a few weeks ago where we were going to the AMO conference in Ottawa. I drove up with one of my fellow councillors. I was like, we'll take my car. I like driving. I got the EV. I've never had a problem getting a spot at an en route to charge while I'm there for 30 minutes or whatever it was. We showed up. The whole thing was full. Yeah. And it was a Sunday afternoon.
I had the same problem on Sunday too.
And I think we were in Mallorytown. We
posted back in Mallorytown too.
And there were 12 cars behind us. And we're like, people are going to be waiting 3 hours. Yeah.
I know, it's ridiculous.
And I was down to 4% because I had timed it exactly, and
Yeah.
I should have maybe just charged over in Kings. But anyway, compared to other places, like you look at what they're doing in Europe, what they're doing in China, and the amount of just charging infrastructure that exists. And it's not just the infrastructure exists, it's supported by green energy. Right?
Exactly.
It's not like it's coal or whatever
Yeah.
it is that's fueling it. It's actually done cleanly, which is way ahead of where we are. So, it feels like every couple of years or every couple of decades, depends which government's in power, you'll have Green Energy Act, or you'll have, the removal of coal, and then you kind of pause for a little while, and then who knows what happens next. But hopefully people will see this as an opportunity soon. Just sort of switching gears a little bit to one of the other challenges, especially here, we talk a lot about housing. We want to build complete communities. We want to have jobs everywhere we are and have access to that from close to home. Housing has been a big problem here in Mississauga. We've got 750,000 people. We've got 250,000 homes. Those are great. We've been pretty stagnant, actually, for the last 20, 25 years. In my community alone, we are 10% lower in population than we were in 2001, according to the census.
Yeah.
Right. And so that has a lot of trickle-down effects in terms of schools, in terms of businesses. And we're creating dense neighborhoods, which is great, but they're not necessarily supported by transit or, I don't know how you drove here, but maybe you passed by the LRT. That didn't really, that's delayed. We don't have any real clue of when it's going to get done. But in terms of housing, in terms of transit, let's get it a little bit to sort of your plan and what you talked about in terms of how we can actually build more housing in this province.
Well, I'd say housing is the number one issue I've worked on at Queen's Park. And I even had a member of the Conservative cabinet come up to me after the election and go, wow, is climate off the table? Because you talk about housing so much, Mike. But I just want to say quickly before I get into housing affordability, housing and climate are intimately linked. The number one driver of climate pollution in Ontario is transportation emissions. And that's primarily driven by the fact that people are forced into long commutes. And so we have to end this incredibly expensive low-density sprawl development pattern we've seen for the last 75 years in Ontario. It's bankrupting municipalities because it costs so much to service it, and it's like hurting families. Like the fact that we're forcing young families in particular to drive until they qualify for a mortgage, and then they're forced into these like long, expensive commutes. That isn't how you build affordable, livable communities that people want to live in.
Yeah.
So we actually have to start building homes that people can afford in the communities they know and love, close to where they work, shop, and spend time with their family. And this is where I get so angry with the Premier. Because I just think it's unacceptable that Doug Ford is the chief NIMBY in Ontario. He has said no to the two key recommendations from his own Housing Affordability Task Force of how we can quickly build homes that people can afford.
What are those two recommendations?
And those recommendations are legalize multiplexes and legalize mid-rise 6 to 11 stories along major transit and transportation corridors. That's the fastest way and the cheapest way we can increase housing supply and build homes where we already have infrastructure in place. We already have pipes and sewers and roads and schools and things like that. And the Premier continues to say no. As a matter of fact, he was just in Windsor last week and he said something like, "Oh, we got to push back against the NIMBYs. But we can't allow people to build homes in existing neighborhoods." And I'm like, isn't that the definition of a NIMBY Premier? And so until the Premier starts saying yes to building homes we can afford, we're not going to solve this crisis. Until the Premier says yes to protecting renters, the fact that there is no city, large or small, in the province of Ontario where a full-time minimum wage worker can afford average monthly rent is unacceptable. Until the Premier says that, government is going to have to get back in to provide a government-funded co-op, nonprofit, and social housing. We stopped doing that in Ontario in 1995. 30 years of no investment in deeply affordable homes has led to the situation we're in right now, where over 81,000 people in a province as wealthy as Ontario are experiencing homelessness. Like, that's just so unacceptable and so unnecessary and costs us so much that we have to address it. And, my goal is I want my kids and all in their generation to have the dream of home ownership. I want people to know that if they work full-time in this province, they can afford the rent. I want people to know that, if they're struggling, maybe they've lost their job or they have to go on social assistance, that they're going to have a safe, affordable place to live. We have the solutions. We just need a government that is willing to implement them.
It does sound like the Premier says the right things and wants to go in that direction in terms of his rhetoric. But we've obviously seen it hasn't followed through in terms of some of their policies. Here in Mississauga, I put forward the fourplex motion to try and get that going because, the feds stood up and said, we'll add some money to the Housing Accelerator Fund if you make some of these changes and have transit-oriented and enabling communities, which is a positive step, even though, no one seems to take ownership of housing. It kind of fits at all three orders of government. So that's been a challenge. But, and when I ran for mayor, we talked about, let's have as of right, 6+ stories along the major arteries because that's where we're investing and we already have the pipes there. And, it seemed to make sense. But I guess one of the challenges, just like on the climate issue, it's bringing people along and being able to show them, what it could look like and that it's not so scary and that it actually would benefit you. Because one of our conversations around the election was heavily surrounded around taxes, right? Property taxes. People seem to know exactly how much they pay in property taxes, whereas you ask them, how much do you pay in HST a year or what's your income tax, provincially or federally? Nobody has any idea. But because the city gives you a bill, you kind of remember that number. And so they're like, oh, yeah. But we're not adding to our tax base. Right? Yeah. So we need to add to our tax base. And if we can do that without having to add new infrastructure, because we're building in existing neighborhoods, that's even better, right? It's a better return. And you can see some of those maps, and Strong Towns likes to do this, where they kind of give you that value per acre. And we're surrounded here in the downtown of Mississauga, huge buildings that still don't have access to higher order transit because they announced the loop, but it hasn't been built and it hasn't started. And we now have an 83-story tower, which is the biggest in Canada outside of Toronto, and it's not on a transit line, right? So you're saying, how do these things make sense, and how can we build more complete communities so that we don't just have these, enclaves of single-family homes that are only drivable, right? And don't have any connection to anything else. We actually just tried I had a motion earlier this year for neighborhood retail to try and make things more walkable. I'm a big advocate for neighborhood
retail. Huge advocate for it. I love neighborhoods. So there's a neighborhood in Guelph called the Ward. Okay. And
The
Ward.
Okay.
At St. Patrick's Ward. Where a number of Italian immigrants came to Guelph. And there used to be a number of manufacturing facilities in the neighborhood. Most of those have closed now and are being converted into housing. But there's all these great little restaurants and bars and dry cleaners and seamstress shops and just sprinkled throughout the neighborhood that you can walk to. And I just think why isn't every neighborhood like this? It is so I live right near the Ward, and it's just so pleasant to just walk. And here's a cafe in the middle of a residential neighborhood. Wow, isn't this awesome? And it's full of kids and life and vibrancy and parents, sitting and having a coffee and hanging out. And I'm just thinking, why can't every neighborhood be like this? It's so pleasant.
People seem afraid of change, or they don't know what could happen. And so I find people jump to the worst possible. Yes. It's if we legalize neighborhood retail, we're going to have cannabis stores everywhere. And it's I think there's lots already. I don't know how many more they could sustain, but we could also say that you can't do that. Let's go to the convenience store. Let's have the local grocery store. Let's have that coffee shop. Let's have more of those third places. But people can't see that in a city like Mississauga, especially because it's so built out and they're so accustomed to the way it's done. Everyone drives. And so when we fight about, bike lanes, and it's why are you trying to build all these bike lanes? And I'm you actually don't have the freedom of choice. You can only take your car to get around the city. And what I'm actually trying to do is make your commute better by giving everybody who's in front of you in traffic more options to get around the city, whether it's by bike, walking, or taking transit. Right? And why wouldn't you want that? Right? And give yourself that option. But then they say, well, we're not other cities like they are in Europe. And there are cities in North America who've done this, who've made the transition and made it easier. Ottawa's done a great job adding new bike infrastructure. When we were at the AMO conference, I took the scooter all over the downtown.
I saw you cruising on your scooter one day. You cruised by so fast, I didn't even get a chance to say hi to you.
And we've got some here now too. It's just been a bit of a challenge, but I want people to sort of dream big and see their city and their community and their province as a place that we can have nice things.
Yeah. I tell you what, every time I'm driving, and I drive more than I want because of the nature of my job, and I'm traveling along and I see cyclists whizzing past me in the bike lane, whether I'm in Mississauga, Toronto, Guelph, wherever, and I just say, thank you, cyclists. That's one less car on the road slowing down my commute. And so as somebody, I walk, I cycle, I drive, I want there to be safe bike lanes because it helps me as a driver and it helps me as a cyclist, and it also gives me the confidence that, my kids can travel around the city in a safe way. And so I think it benefits everyone. I understand people's resistance to change. I totally get that. But man, it is so much cheaper and more pleasant and livable.
And it's
and
healthy.
have lots of options, and it's way healthier. Yeah.
The number one barrier we see from people adopting, getting on their bike to get somewhere is safety.
100%.
Right.
Yeah.
I'm not comfortable. Most people aren't comfortable, on the roads at 70 kilometers, 80 kilometers an hour and biking next to that. So you need safe, separated infrastructure. And then on transit, it seems, the biggest barrier is reliability. Right, you need systems to be invested in, and Ontario seems to be the only province that has not invested in transit operations. A lot of other provinces will sort of pay for that operating funding. They do seem to like announcing the projects and paying for the capital, and some of them have gotten deals. Like I think Toronto and Ottawa did, but Mississauga was the third largest city, and we didn't get our new deal. Why? What do you think is the root of the problem with some of these huge infrastructure projects in terms of being on time, not on time, and not on budget? I mean, the Eglinton Crosstowns, I can't remember how many years behind it is, but we're starting
now, I think.
We're starting that too in Mississauga, where we're way behind on the
Ontario
LRT. So what do you think's behind that?
So I think it's the way we build transit. And so first of all, let's go back. I'm going to go back to your operating. One of the things I've been calling for is a new deal for cities, because we just can't keep downloading all these costs onto the property tax base. It's the most regressive form of taxation. And yes, I do want to pay property taxes as a homeowner, but you can't make it so expensive that it becomes unaffordable for people to live.
And it can't be the only thing that.
And it can't be the only thing.
Yeah.
So two things I think the province should do immediately is, one, they should upload community and social housing costs. That should have never been downloaded on the property tax base. It should be at the province. And they should restore 50% operational funding for transit. We spend lots of money on roads. Why don't we spend some money on transit too, And we maintain those roads. So let's help cities maintain their transit systems so they're affordable. And the key is reliable. I think reliability is even more important I think people are willing to pay $2-3 to ride on, transit, as long as it's on time, it's convenient, it's pleasant to ride. And that's not always the case. So I think one of our problems in Ontario is the countries that do transit well, they just are always building.
Right.
So it's like they just keep building, a kilometer a year, a kilometer next year, a kilometer the following year. What we do here is we go 20 years without building anything. And then we big project announcement. And then it's well, who's going to build this? Because we don't build these things. And then it's and then you put together these consortiums of, public-private partnerships that oftentimes don't necessarily work. And we've seen that now with the delays in the Eglinton Crosstown, the Finch, LRT here in Ontario, obviously here in Mississauga. And then government, then they go into hiding. So we can't even get the province to even give us a timeline for when the LRT here is going to be completed, or Eglinton, I think it was supposed to be complete in 2019. It's 2025 and we still have no idea. There is no timetable of when it's going to be completed. And so I think if we just continually added to our transit lines, we would maintain that expertise. We would have, companies, or I would think even better, the public sector having the ability to continue to build. And that's how the countries in Europe and Asia that do transit much more effectively than we do, from a cost perspective, from a reliability perspective, and from a build perspective, that's how they do it. And I think we should learn from them.
I'd like you to expand on that idea of a new deal for cities, because I've heard you, I've heard other politicians talk about that. How can we do that? How can we get a different deal for cities? How can we fund cities differently? And what's your plan?
Yeah. So first of all, we need to upload the things that should have never been downloaded onto cities, and so housing and transit operations are the two biggest ones for me, and they'll be the biggest bang for the buck for municipalities. The second is the way in which infrastructure is funded to cities. Right now, infrastructure is funded to provide announceables for politicians and not for what's good for cities. So we need stable, predictable, long-term funding, not these one-off announcements. So the premier at AMO conference just last week announced, an additional $1.6 billion for municipalities to access housing enabling infrastructure. Well, how do you plan for that? It's like a one-off announcement. So it's like everyone is scrambling now to get a piece of this $1.6 billion, which isn't going to be enough to provide infrastructure.
Can I tell you something funny?
For everyone. Yeah, tell me. I want to hear your funny story.
Well, I mean, I was standing with a lot of our staff from the Region Appeal. The Region Appeal alone, which is Mississauga, Brampton, and Caledon, where we're a quarter of the population of the province. And the amount of growth that they expect to be here is hundreds of thousands of people, right? And our infrastructure budget for water and wastewater infrastructure alone over the next 10 years is $20 billion.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah.
Right? So a $1.6 billion fund for the entire province's 444 municipalities is not going to scratch the surface of the challenge that we've got.
Well, I remember when they announced the fund for the small municipality portion, because some of them were saying, "Hey, you're giving Toronto and Ottawa, so the big cities," and so I can't remember, it was like $100 million or something. And I was sitting there with folks from Collingwood, and they go, "Wait a second, our plant alone is going to be $350 million, like $100 billion, like that's like how's that going to help?" But and then the other thing that's so frustrating is it's these one-time funding announcements, and so how do you plan? And so it's like the Hunger Games now, where municipalities are spending staff time and resources scrambling, trying to say, like, how do we get a proposal in? How do we write the proposal to fit the criteria of the grant? And if we just had, predictable, sustainable funding, and that funding, frankly, should include climate resiliency, because my fear is we're building infrastructure that was built for a climate of 10 years ago and not a climate 10 years into the future, or even what we're experiencing right now. So we're going to end up actually costing us more because we're not building things out properly in a responsible way. And so the province has got to step up. And you know what? A lot of people don't know this. Prior to 1989, we didn't have things like development charges because the province paid for that infrastructure.
Right.
And so, the province downloaded it onto municipalities, and the municipalities are like, well, how are we going to afford this? So we brought in things like development charges, which in a sense is a tax on new housing. And now we're getting to the point where, people like myself and others are starting to say, well, hey, if we're going to incentivize home building, it can't cost somebody an extra $120,000 in development charges to build a home. And so we're going to need to look at reducing development charges. I've been saying, hey, let's get rid of development charges on starter homes built within existing urban boundaries, where we already have the infrastructure built, where it's cheaper. But the province is going to have to replace that money because municipalities can't survive without those funds. Otherwise, we're never going to have the infrastructure needed to build out those communities.
No, and they've said, we'll keep you whole if you reduce your fees.
They haven't.
And that's kind of what we said at the conference as well. We said, listen, Mississauga has taken what I think is some of the most aggressive steps to make building better here in the city. We've halved our development charges. Now, having them to basically where they were 10 years ago, still, it's still better than what it was. But also, how are they going to keep us whole? We haven't seen that yet. So that's been one of the challenges. And actually, you mentioned one of the things that I lobbied specifically to the finance minister, saying, there's no scenario in which the Region Appeal and the City of Mississauga do not continue to deliver the provincial services that you ask us to deliver. Right? So why do we need to keep jumping through these hoops every single year, applying for these grant programs when, we deliver a quarter of the service that you need delivered in this province? Like, this seems kind of insane for us to spend those resources, and then we transfer that bureaucratic work onto our partners as well, right? So we have not-for-profit housing builders, charity housing builders, and we make them jump through these hoops because that's what it's required with us, right? And so we spend all this time doing bureaucratic red tape, which, they have a minister for removing red tape, and I keep telling them, this is one of them. If you can turn this into stable, reliable funding, we can do a lot of good, because then we can start thinking about how to improve the system and not just trying to survive year after year.
So you're getting to one of the things that frustrates me the most about the way government works here in Ontario and really across Canada and probably all of North America is we are so afraid the government's going to make a mistake or maybe not appropriately fund something properly, or we just underfund things and don't want to admit it to the public we're underfunding it. So then we create all these scenarios to try to put Band-Aids on things or try to mitigate any sort of risk that might happen. And all of that ends up costing us way more than if we just allowed government to like do things and provided predictable funding and said, you know what, I'm a business person. Let's put it in a business context. When I started my business, I had to make investments in order to grow my business and get a return on that investment. Government has to do the exact same thing, but for whatever reason, we don't allow government to do that. And it ends up costing us so much more, and all this bureaucratic red tape and paper shuffling and box checking. And that's why things take 10 years to get built that should have taken a year to get built.
The surprising to me on this topic, and maybe we'll put it to bed after this, but it seems something that's unique to North America because, and some people will say, well, you can't compare us to China. You can't compare us. I'm like, sure, I'm not comparing us to those, but they do find a way to get it done. But look at the Europeans. Look at what they've been able to do. How has Paris transformed itself in the last 10 years in their infrastructure projects? How they rebuilt their water systems, how they rebuilt some transit lines in preparation for the Olympics. They were able to do that in a city that's 1,000 years old. And you would think that the French would be just as bureaucratic and litigious as we are, and they were still able to get it done.
Yeah. No, right? it's a huge problem all across North America.
Yeah,
it really is.
And it requires a different mindset that we need to sort of change the way things get done. So hopefully any new deal with cities sort of has that conversation of how do we change the way we do things.
Yeah. And then the final piece of that would be just, I think we have to look at revenue tools. I mean, the City of Toronto Act gives Toronto the opportunity.
We've asked every year, give us the same tools that Toronto has.
100%. You should have them.
Why does that city have a different relationship than, I know they're the biggest ones, but just as many people live around the 905 than live in the 416.
Yeah,
right.
No, absolutely. No, Mississauga should have it. Brampton, Vaughan, Guelph, Kitchener, Waterloo, Windsor, Ottawa, Sudbury, the list goes on and on.
So Cam Guthrie, Mayor Cam, has been on the pod before. He was a guest in the past. How's your relationship with him?
Very good relationship with the mayor. We work well together. I mean, I think both of us have been probably the loudest advocates for legalizing multiplexes over the last 5 years. Guelph was one of the first cities to do that. And we're still getting some pushback in Guelph, I can tell you. But you know what? I think when you are united, and most people know the mayor and I don't share the same party background, and our federal MP has a different party background as well. And the three of us have actually worked really well together to get our community to say yes to things like multiplexes. We've had huge success in building permanent supportive housing in Guelph to move people out of encampments into housing with wraparound mental health addictions and supports. And I think we've been able to do it because we've shown a united front as all three levels of government working together across different party lines, and then partnering with the private sector, social service agencies, and securing funding from all levels of government. And I think it's an example of what a community can do positively when you build those kind of relationships.
So what's your relationship like with the federal party, with the federal government? How's that been? I don't know how you get to interact with them as a provincial party leader.
Yeah, so I would say the federal Liberals I've had good relationships with. I mean, our MP has been Liberal the whole time I've been a Green MPP. And so Lloyd Longfield, who was a previous MP, he and I had a great relationship, did a lot of joint advocacy to the province and the federal government as well. And
what would you want the feds to be doing right now, or what else could they be doing?
Well, I think one of the things is helping fund infrastructure.
Yeah.
We need, and the federal government is doing that.
Yeah.
And Mississauga's got money, Guelph's got money for legalizing multiplexes. Do more of that. I don't want to get too partisan federally, but it's this notion that the Conservatives have that we're going to take money away from cities. It just makes absolutely no sense when every city has this huge infrastructure deficit, and we simply can't ask property taxpayers to pay that deficit off, and we can't ask new homeowners to do it. It's just otherwise we're going to completely price new home construction out of reach for people. And so unless the province and the federal government step in and fill that vacuum, it's not going to happen. And so I would say one of the most important things the federal government can do is partner with the provincial government, get us the infrastructure we need to unlock housing and build complete communities that are walkable, cyclable, have good transit, etc. And then the other one for me which is outside of the realm of municipalities but deeply affects municipalities, is we got to shore up our healthcare system. I mean, hospitals in Ontario are on the verge of collapsing. The wait times in our emergency departments, the fact that 2.5 million people don't have access to a family doctor.
I think I saw that on the side of a bus.
I think you did too. Huge wait. Like, I can't tell you how many people come into my office trying to get their loved one into a long-term care home, or to even get access home and community care. Our healthcare system is so underfunded. And I realize that's primarily provincial jurisdiction, and I'm going to lay a lot of the blame for that at the feet of the provincial government, the Ford government. But you know what? Anything the federal government can do to increase healthcare transfers can just help us address, a huge need we have. And people say, oh, but we can't afford it. Well, we spend less money on healthcare than the U.S. does, and we get better outcomes. So we could even get better outcomes for people if we actually spent more. And I think it's a really good investment.
So the Greens seem to have been, on a bit of a high, especially under your leadership. You've had Ainsley's another member of your caucus. Federally, it kind of wanes up and down. I think recently Elizabeth May announced that she won't run again as leader. What about you? Would you think about running for leader federally?
You're not the first person to ask me this question in the last few days. I have no plans to run federally at all. I love being the leader of the Ontario Green Party. I'm very focused on building this party. I think a lot of good things are happening with the Ontario Greens. We've doubled our caucus since the 2022 election, almost past the finish line in a couple other ridings. I think there's huge opportunities for us. I wish the federal party well. We need a strong federal Green Party.
What type of person are you looking for? Who do you think needs to be a leader there? Do you like the two-leader thing?
I didn't like the two-leader thing, to be honest with you. I know some other Green parties in like New Zealand and some other countries have effectively had co-leaders, but I think in Canada, I think it just confused everyone. Who is the leader? And sometimes they would say things that weren't completely on the same page, and then people get confused. Queen's Park Observer said that their recommendation was that the Green Party of Canada should have somebody like Mike Schreiner, even if Mike Schreiner doesn't want the job. And so I'd say, you know what? I think we need a younger version of me who maybe like
you're pretty
Morris.
Young. Yeah, or Mike Morris, yeah.
But just somebody who's going to work hard, who's going to bring, I think, a principled, pragmatic, progressive vision to the Green Party of Canada, and is going to look at how we can build out a grassroots movement across the country that's going to help elect more Greens at the federal level. As I said when we opened this conversation, the climate crisis is here. Over 600 people died in the heat wave in BC. Look at the damage that happened here in Mississauga last summer with the floods. This is the second summer two out of the last 3 summers where it's been hard for people to go outside. My daughter works full-time at a camp near Bancroft and texted me a week and a half ago, and she's like, Dad, the other side of the lake is on fire. And I'm just like, this doesn't have to be our future. It doesn't, because it's cheaper to have clean energy. It's going to benefit our economy. And so I think right now we need a strong Green Party. And even if it's just like 3 or 4 seats in the federal parliament, I think Ontario Greens with 2 seats punch well above our weight and really move the debate and the conversation in the province of Ontario. And I think we need that at the federal level as well.
Well, congratulations for your success, your party's success. I think it's been a lot to attribute to you and your personal commitment to the cause. And you're an affable person. I think your voters continue to send you to Queen's Park, and you certainly punch above your weight. And I think people see you on TV fighting for your community, fighting for the issues that you've put forward. And if that helps drive the agenda forward with the government or with opposition parties, and makes progress, well then congratulations, you can take credit for that.
I appreciate that. Can I make one more plug?
Yeah, absolutely.
So one of the things I'm really working hard on right now is protecting farmland. And so I have this food belt bill to create a food belt in Ontario to protect farmland. And there's a Mississauga connection.
Really?
And here's what it is. I can't tell you how many people have said to me, wow, back when I was a kid, such and such place in Mississauga was where our farm was, and now it's a city, and we still grow food in Ontario. And I'm like, yeah, we do. But at some point, we're not going to be able to anymore. And we can't continue to lose 319 acres of farmland each and every day in the province of Ontario when only
319 acres a day?
A day. That's the equivalent of 9 family farms a week.
Because of development.
Sprawl,
forest fires?
highways, aggregate mining, like all kinds of development. Like literally we're not going to be able to feed ourselves if this continues. Less than 5% of Ontario's land is suitable for growing food. 0.5, less than 1% is prime farmland. The food and farming sector contributes $51 billion to Ontario's economy, employs over 875,000 people. 1 in 9 jobs is in the agri-food system, the largest employer of the province of Ontario, and we are literally paving it over. And this is why building homes that we can afford within existing urban boundaries is so critically important. This is why developing employment lands for industry and commerce in a thoughtful way that doesn't pave over our farmland is so critically important, especially at a time when, we're under attack from Trump, our food security, food sovereignty's under attack. And I just want to say, because I'm on a podcast that I'm guessing is primarily a big city audience, that people in cities eat 3 times a day. You have a vested interest in ensuring that we can grow enough food to feed ourselves in Ontario. And we're building, this is why I wanted to bring it up, because I'm even having government members coming over talking to me saying like,
well, you want them to steal this idea, right? You want them to take this.
Oh, yeah, no, I'm like, you can steal it.
Yeah.
Come on, this is a great idea. Like, and I'm like, you can have it. Well, let's just pass it. And I think that's one of the things that really separates the Greens is that we just want to put good ideas on the table. I don't care who gets credit for it. I just want it to happen. And this food belt build is one that is so critically important. And I just want to make a pitch because I know Mississauga's all conservative MPPs. Take it, steal it. You guys can have all the credit. Let's just get it done.
Well, it's a great idea, and that's a great attitude to have because we're not going to get change without collaboration, and we need good ideas from everyone, and we should beg, borrow, and steal whenever we get the opportunity to do that, because no one has a monopoly on the right thing to do, right? And so, really, thank you, Mike. I really appreciate you coming down and taking the time to talk about this. You're a champion for your community. You're a champion for the environment. You're a champion for housing. I wish we could talk for another hour about some of these issues. But let's keep in touch, and really appreciate you coming on.
Thanks, Alvin.
Thank you.
Just really admired how much you've been able to accomplish here at Mississauga City Hall, and especially valued your motion to legalize fourplexes.
Thanks, Mike.